A few weeks before Christmas 2009, a snowstorm blew through the Salt Lake Valley, and a young mother of two from West Valley City disappeared. As her husband became the primary suspect, the sprawling investigation unraveled a tangled web of horrors within the family, and more devastating tragedies followed. This is Below the Salt.
Alrighty, everybody. Welcome to our Susan and Cox Powell episode. Disappearance of Susan Cox Powell.
Yes. This is a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. And also our season 1 finale.
Hey!
Thank you for everybody that has listened to all of our episodes up to now.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys.
Yeah, before we really get into the episode, we just want to let you know that we will not be posting an episode for the rest of the year.
After this one, of course.
We are rewriting our formula just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So come January, we're going to be nice and shiny and brand new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're hoping to do about 3 podcast episodes a month.
Yeah, instead of every other week, we'll do the first 3 Mondays of the month.
Yeah, so we hope that you guys will enjoy our new formula moving forward.
We're wanting to have some more interaction with our listeners. That would be really fun, and just get some more sweet content to you guys.
Oh, yeah, we love that content.
Yeah. So, anyways, Susan Cox Powell. Another thing, it is the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance as of 2 days ago.
Yes, that's correct.
December 6th.
Whew.
So, it's been a long, hard decade for her family and her friends, And Jack and I actually attended the memorial in West Valley for her.
We did 2 days
Friday.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Sunday now as we record this, and this was on Friday.
Yeah.
But so we might interject a little bit here and there, like off our script, just a little bit, because we got some interesting new insight at this memorial. There's not really any new information.
Not precisely. Yeah. There are a few things.
And we did a lot of our research before we went to this.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. So we'll definitely talk about that a little bit through this episode as well. So without further ado, I guess I'll start.
Okay.
And take us all the way back to 1976.
Whoa, okay, so I thought this was starting in 2008, but it's 1996.
We're going way back.
1976?
1976.
Okay.
January 20th, to be exact.
Okay.
When Joshua Powell was born.
Oh, he's an Aquarius.
Yes, he is an Aquarius. Okay. Luckily for you.
Yeah, I'm a Capricorn.
So
missed that.
Birthday's only like 2 days before his.
I know,
so.
Right? Okay.
Anyways, yes. Joshua Powell was born on January 20th, 1976 in Puyallup, Washington. He was the second of 5 children. His siblings were Jennifer, Josh, John, Michael, and Alina. And
okay.
I did say Josh in there. That's not his sibling. That's him.
He has
4 siblings. 3 sisters. 2 sisters and 2 brothers.
2 brothers and him.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes. And his parents were Stephen and Terica Powell.
Terica.
I'm not sure.
She goes by Terry.
She does go by Terry, so those are his parents. And from the outside, the Powells, they're your pretty typical family for his neighborhood.
They're Mormon.
Yes, they were Mormon. They were
in Washington,
part of the
which
ward
is a
up
little
in
more
Puyallup.
Rare than
yes.
In a rarer breed in Washington than they would be in Utah.
Yeah, but there's still, there's communities everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Of LDS people. So, yeah, they were in a ward up there. And like I said, they had a pretty typical looking family, especially when Josh was young. But that was not the case. Steve and Terry had a very dysfunctional marriage.
Yes.
And this actually was, in part, it's been said, because Steve he did not want to be a member of the LDS church. He did not agree with a lot of the teachings. He did not agree with the way they should live. Mm-hmm. So that caused a lot of contention between Steve and Terry.
And in the home.
Yeah, of course. If your parents aren't getting along, your kids are going to notice. You know, you might think they don't, but they do.
Yeah.
Although Steve, he was vocal about not liking it, but he never really made them not go or anything. And he actually baptized Josh when Josh was 8.
So he's at least a priest in the priesthood.
Yeah.
You have to be a priest in order to baptize.
Yeah.
So.
But so as he was growing up, Josh he did have a difficult childhood.
Yeah, difficult on kind of a weird scale, but yeah, it was not a normal childhood by any means.
Definitely not a normal childhood, and I'm sure that there are a lot of factors. Of course, his home life being one of them, but I also think that there was, and this is speculation. This is speculation, but I think it's pretty clear that there's mental illness involved.
Yeah.
Just because of some of the stuff that comes out later, even though there's no substantial evidence.
Well, and there's not a lot of diagnoses.
No.
Except for on one of Josh's brothers, John?
Yes, John is the only one that got an official diagnosis.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of problems, and I have some examples.
Yeah, let's dig into it.
Josh, he was pretty smart. He's a bright kid.
Mm-hmm.
He was really into technology, computers, stuff like that, you know. Yeah. And of course, when he was first going to school, is when at-home computers, you know, PCs were really becoming
rare.
a thing.
Oh, they're starting, yeah.
Yeah, so he was very into that and very good with them, really. But he failed in school a lot, and he even failed art in kindergarten, which I thought was interesting.
They have art grades in kindergarten?
It's just because it says it's because he just didn't get the structure of the classroom.
Oh,
it's not even that he didn't get what was going on or pay attention, just the structure of the classroom didn't really work for him, which I get.
Well, I get that, and I also get that some people would read into that his home life had little structure.
Mm-hmm.
And like an armchair psychologist would say, oh, well, if he's not getting structure at home, he's not going to understand structure at school.
I disagree with that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I just don't think that the classroom learning environment was right for him because, like I said, he's very good with the electronics. True. I think he just was a hands-on type of learner, you know. I think, like, the lecture
there's different kinds of learners.
Just wasn't exactly right for him because his home definitely had structure.
Okay.
It just was an atypical structure.
Okay, all right. You want to dig into it?
Yes.
Okay.
So, we're going to talk about Stephen Powell a little bit.
And just brace yourself, folks, because this is a ride.
He's a fucking monster.
Yeah.
But let's start out small. So, when Josh was growing up, Stephen would frequently force his children to take ice baths if they wet the bed.
That seems
like,
weird.
which I
Punitive.
don't get at all. He also pit the children against each other a lot.
Oh. That's
with
gross.
competition and just who's better, and he was particularly hard on Josh, is what I've been able to find. Even Terry, later in life, has said that he was particularly rough on Josh, which I understand. You know, he's the oldest boy. As much as I disagree with that, I understand that's why it would be in this unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah.
But he was hard on all the kids, and there's one example that I read about when Jennifer, who is the oldest child and the oldest daughter, of course,
who we saw at the event on
we
Friday.
did get to see Jennifer. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but she's really cool. But when she was a child, she was working on a sewing project, I guess, and hadn't quite finished it, but wanted to take a break, so she left her stuff out with the sewing machine. And the younger brother, John, wanted to work on a project of his own with the sewing machine.
Okay.
But since Jennifer had left all her stuff out, Steve came in, tore her project up, and then smacked her so that John could use it.
Jeez.
Because she had left this stuff out, you know, like she was just taking a break for a minute. It wasn't even like a mess, I bet. John wanted to use it, and so Jennifer got smacked.
There's physical abuse happening.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And this, again, there's no concrete evidence of any sexual abuse happened, but it has been come out that there were a lot of sexual undertones. And I'm sorry I misspoke. There absolutely was sexual abuse. I don't know if there was physical touching between Stephen and any of his children. But Steve did share pornography with all of the boy siblings when they were as young as like 8.
Okay,
that is sexual abuse.
Yeah, that's sexual. 8 years old. That's
not appropriate.
And honestly, it's kind of questionable.
Oh, it's horrible.
First of all,
I don't think at any age it's really like that great for a parent to show porn to their kids.
That's like, not
That's weird.
That's not normal by any stretch.
Mm-hmm. And this clearly had an effect on Josh.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I mean, if you get violence and sexuality mixed up that young,
it's horrible.
You become
it messes you up for forever.
I mean, it can.
Yes.
It doesn't always, but it doesn't help.
It's part of that
That's
serial
for sure.
killer soup for sure.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Stephen definitely was not a good dad. He would enforce limits on weird things like the sewing machine, but then in other things like bedtimes, stuff like that, really wasn't strict.
Oh, really?
So it just was interesting.
What?
There's so there was structure, but an atypical structure, like I said before. So it just was really weird.
Okay.
And Josh went on to try to kill himself when he was 14.
Oh,
he tried to hang himself, but was unsuccessful.
Yeah.
And then another time, when his mother Terry wanted his help doing the dishes, he picked up a butcher knife and turned to her and said, "Don't push it, Mom," and threatened her with the knife.
That is... What age was that?
He was about 14-ish.
Oh, jeez.
Maybe a little older after
I
the
mean,
suicide
adolescence
attempt.
is a tough time, but most people don't threaten their moms with knives.
Josh also killed a bunch of his sister's pet gerbils.
Okay, so we're getting into the triad a little bit,
Yes.
which is bedwetting, fire starting, and animal abuse. So, as a propensity for future violence.
And just saying, it was a common thing that when bedwetting happened, these children would get ice baths. So I think
so obviously
just
bedwetting was occurring.
That is explicitly mentioned in several of the reports I read makes me think that bedwetting was a more frequent occurrence.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So Stephen's kind of an unusual person.
Yes, and I'm about to talk about him some more.
Okay.
So, when Josh was about 10, his mom Terry found one of Stephen's journals. And you guys will realize in this case there are a lot
of
journal entries.
So many journals.
From Stephen,
Josh,
from Susan even. And I think that is a big thing in the LDS community. I think journal keeping is very encouraged.
They talk about it a lot.
Especially for young men and young women, they can kind of get you involved in that as a way to...
They highly encourage it.
Yeah, it's like self-introspection, which really is a good thing, and I totally get that, but I just am shocked at the volume that this family actually
every single
did
one of them journals like crazy.
Yeah,
it's
and keeps
weird.
So many records, which is part of why this case is so deep and there's so much information, is because of these actual records that were found. So anyways, Terry found one of Steve's journals. And in this journal, it detailed Steve's explicit sexual fantasies of one of his neighbor's wives.
Ooh, okay.
And
gross.
it talked about how if this other man died, he would marry this other woman. And how she would be...
leave Terry?
That he wanted it to be a plural marriage. He wanted to begin practicing polygamy.
So he doesn't like the church, but he does like polygamy.
Yes, he does.
How does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know. He just wants the power, man, because that's what the polygamy is really all about. And Terry has even said that some of the other stuff he mentioned in this journal made her think that maybe he wanted to kill that man in order to marry his wife.
Like, he kind of insinuated, like, oh, if so-and-so, quote-unquote, had an accident.
Exactly.
Yikes.
He also said that people were animals and should be able to have sex with anyone, anytime.
Yeah, people, like, are literally animals, but we have this thing called society, and, like, it kind of frowns on this sort of thing.
So after she found this journal, Steve did talk to her about polygamy a little bit and wanting to join it. She's like, no, of course not. We don't.
Yeah.
Like, you and I are together. And nothing ever really came of that after this instance.
Mm-hmm.
But, however, Terry did end up getting several venereal diseases.
Interesting.
From Steve.
So he was doing something.
Oh, yeah.
Extramarital.
Yes.
Yikes.
Yeah. Ugh. And then another thing that I want to tell you about Steve at this point in his children's lives, he was attracted to his oldest daughter, Jennifer.
Ugh. That's disgusting.
Mm-hmm. There are several quotes pulled from his journals that say stuff like, I remember many times sitting at the breakfast bar with her, and she would dress in these little outfits and drive me nuts.
Ew. Oh.
Yeah, and talking about another time when he and Jennifer had to stay like they were going on an overnight trip or something. I'm not sure why they were
He could
away
have
from the rest
arranged
of the
that.
family.
Yikes.
But they had to stay in a hotel room, and she like came out of the bathroom just in her underwear, you know, because you know she was a young kid at that
Yeah.
point. She's with her dad, who you're
Yeah.
supposed to be safe with,
Yeah.
and was just like getting something out of her bag. And he talks about like how good she looked just in her underwear and how
So he's like an incestuous
his
pedophile.
own daughter. Yes,
Ugh.
it's disgusting.
That's super fucked up.
Terry moved out for a little while after she found this journal and after some of these conversations happened. But she ended up moving back in a couple years later. Or I'm not sure exactly how long she's lasted, but she stayed with him for a couple more years. Until finally, in 1992, she proceeded with divorce. The divorce. Yeah, and this is when Josh was about 16.
Okay, so, alright.
And the divorce was nasty, too.
Well, I imagine.
Yeah.
Of
course, Terry told...
Steve seems like the kind of person who is very possessive.
Yes.
So he's not going to let that
Yeah, and there's just a bunch of nasty stuff. Terry, of course, told the court about, like, the pornography that Steve had shown the boys and the polygamy interest. And she talked about how hard he was on Josh, and Steve even admitted himself that he had a harder time with Josh and didn't know how to handle him as well as the other kids.
So Josh was a little more pig-headed than the other kids,
yeah,
maybe?
I think so.
Okay.
And Steve, even in divorce filings, claimed that Terry, because she was interested in like herbal remedies and natural healing.
Homeopathic.
Yeah, which is totally fine.
Fine, yeah.
And
not
her Mormon beliefs, you know. Yeah. He said that she was getting into witchcraft and devil worship.
Ah, yes. So he doesn't have... He's not interested in being part of the Mormon church anymore because he thinks it's too much. He probably thinks it's not quite enough. And like he thinks that it should be okay. That's speculation on my part, but he's crazier than the Mormon church will let him be.
Oh yeah.
Basically.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeesh.
But the divorce did go through and it was finalized.
Good for Terry, I guess.
Terry, she got custody of Alina, who is the youngest daughter. The youngest daughter.
Yeah.
Well, Josh and his brothers did go with Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. But a couple of years after that, Alina even went to live with Steve as well. So Terry didn't keep any of them. And at this point, Jennifer
had moved out.
Yeah, she was over 18.
And I think she moved to Utah.
Yes, she did move to Utah. Yep. So that's Josh's childhood. You know, it's pretty... There's some...
The serial killer soup is starting to come together rather...
Yes.
Rather normally, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
You've got systemic sexual abuse. You've got physical abuse. You've got a unsecure family dynamic. You've got a recipe on your hands. Josh is one good head injury away from going full blown Ted Bundy.
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah. So at this point, it's 1998. And Josh had moved from Puyallup to Seattle.
Okay. Which is pretty nearby, I believe.
Yeah.
They're neighbors.
Yeah. And he was studying at the University of Washington.
Hey, Ted Bundy went to the University of Washington. That's interesting.
And this is where he began his first real serious relationship outside of the immediate family.
Okay.
With a girl named Catherine Everett.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think... Oh, sorry, I'm going to interject a little bit here. There is a phenomenal podcast on the Susan Powell case called Cold.
It's amazing. By Dave Cawley.
From KSL News Radio.
Which, by the way, we got to see him on Friday at the memorial.
We did.
He was the moderator of the panel.
A lot of our sources come from there and from outside of there, of course. But if you're further interested in this case, please look it up.
Super in-depth
very, very in-depth.
Definitely check out Cold. It's not explicit like we can be also. There's no like swearing or anything like that. So if that's more your speed, definitely check it out.
Dave digs into this Catherine Everett thing quite
I'm just going to kind of briefly go over her because it's been commented that she could have easily been Susan.
Oh, yeah.
He
changed the scenarios a little bit.
Josh and her met in an LDS function because he still was a member of the church at this time.
Was it like a singles board?
I'm not sure if it was a singles ward
Or like a
or just
student
the
ward.
same ward.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's how they met, and they ended up moving into each other after
Moving
dating for
into
just
each
a little
other?
bit. Moving in
With
each other.
It's cool.
Thank you. I have written here they moved into an apartment together.
Oh, okay. So like
Yeah.
the words got all.
They
Okay.
moved in with each other.
Okay. Which is frowned upon.
Yes, it is. But I mean, again, they're living outside of Utah, so maybe it's not quite as strictly enforced to not move in with each other, like even in the LDS community and where they were living.
Maybe.
And especially, like, I know Josh
was not
super
particularly
into it.
into
He's
the
still a member,
into the
but
Mormon church.
yeah. But they moved in with each other, and that is when Josh became super, super possessive.
Okay.
And Catherine later said he would have restrictions and limitation on what I could and couldn't do when it came to my own family.
Okay. Well, and that's one of the first steps of an abuse
Isolation.
cycle is isolation.
Yep. She said if I was going to go visit them, he had to come too. I couldn't go by myself.
And they were just dating.
They were just dating.
Yikes.
And when Catherine once visited a friend...
That's a big red flag.
Yes, it is. She went to visit a friend in Utah without him, and she decided she wasn't even going to come back to Seattle, and she broke up with him over the phone.
And moved like on a whim.
just
Oh,
went to
not
Utah.
on a whim, but like
Just went to
like
Utah, yeah.
quick.
And so that is where people say the real difference
She
between
survived.
Catherine and Susan comes in, is that Catherine got away.
Early-ish.
Yes.
Okay. Yikes.
Yep. There actually is another girl that Josh had been dating and been interested in before he met Catherine,
Mm-hmm.
like late in high school.
She might have seen a red flag even earlier.
But I couldn't find a lot of information on her, so I wasn't going to talk about her a lot. But again, if you're more interested in the case, I think they talk about it just a teeny little bit on Cold.
I think
it's
they do.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So after Catherine and Josh broke up, he met Susan Cox.
Okay.
She met him in the LDS Institute of Religion course that he had also
yeah, so it's
enrolled
like
in.
a college
Yes.
Mormon courses.
And they met at a party in Tacoma.
Okay.
In November of 2000.
Okay, so about 9 years before
Yep.
Susan disappeared.
So, like I said, they met in November of 2000. They began dating and got married in April of 2001.
Okay,
So that's only about
5 months?
5.
5 to 6 months.
Well, yeah, it's about 5 because they met at the end of November
And they got married in
at
April.
the beginning of April.
Which is, I will point out again, yet another sign of the abuse cycle is that
Moving very fast.
male abusers tend to move very fast, and they want to lock down. They want to create commitments.
It's so hard to tell people about, especially in the LDS community, because it's so common
It's
for
very
people to get
common
married
for people to
faster.
do this. Actually,
Just because
5 or 6 months is
That's
not
like a
the
long
shortest I've
average
heard of.
relationship.
Yeah.
I have a cousin who recently got married, and they only knew each other from September to the beginning of January, so it's a little bit shorter.
Yeah, that's shorter.
But I mean, they seem to be very happy, and everything is good for them, and that's great. And I know a lot of couples.
Oh, it can work
who
out.
have gotten married very fast, like my mom and stepdad.
But
for
it
instance,
also
got married fast.
forces you into a committed situation very early
Yes.
before you can find all the other red flags that could possibly crop up.
Yes.
So
it's just
it definitely
interesting.
gives the advantage to the abuser.
Yeah. But it's also just so encouraged here, like in the LDS community especially, people are encouraged to get married and to have lots of children.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to have a lot of children and that's what you do want to do, you do kind of have to get married younger because there is a limited time on childbearing years, you know?
True. And years where you're energetic enough to take care of children.
So, I understand why it happens. I just think it's dangerous.
It doesn't
be
help.
dangerous.
I'll just say that much.
Yeah. So they got married, like I said, April 2001 at the Portland, Oregon Temple.
Okay.
And
Which I think is the closest one to them.
Yeah.
In Puyallup.
And just something that I want to note that really made me so mad when I heard it.
Oh, I think I know what this is.
Josh made Susan buy her own engagement ring.
Oh, God.
Now,
Josh
it's a different situation because she was working at JCPenney's and they do have that jewelry
Discount.
counter there,
Yeah.
And she got a discount. And so Josh, told her, oh, he's looking for a ring for his mom. Let's go look at rings and you can help me pick one out and tell me what you like and blah, blah, blah. And then he had her buy one and then wrote her a check later for it. But I'm like, that
dude,
is just
not okay. Well, and
what are you doing?
Josh is...
And that leads to later financial issues that
Josh
very controlling
is
about.
very financially abusive, which means he made sure to control the money so that if she, for example, wanted to leave, she would have no resources.
Yes.
And he's also, like, this weird... He pinches pennies like crazy with stuff like feeding his family, but he also spends a ton of money on garbage and toys and all this other stuff. So he has this completely askew mindset when it comes to financial priorities. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Susan even was making a large part of their money.
Yeah, Josh. Josh
it's not
never
like she
held
was just
really
a stay-at-home
solid
mom who
jobs.
just took care of kids or whatever, and so that's why he felt power over the money, which I still don't think is okay. But she worked, you know.
Yeah, she worked
that money
steady, good
was
jobs.
hers, and she wasn't even allowed to spend that. So.
I don't understand that. I
don't either.
If someone was like, "Hey, you're gonna make all the money, but I get to control it," I'd be like, "Okay, bye."
Yeah, I don't understand it.
But it's just another one of those steps of financial abuse, and honestly, they creep up. It's not like they're just like one day that happens. It's this creep thing, and abusers are so good at it, and they're so good at hiding it. Most people are shocked when they find out that abuse is going on.
Another thing that I think is so hard is that Susan's family told her not to marry Josh. At least not yet when she got married, because
you don't know him.
Her mom has even been quoting as saying, like, there's just something not right.
Something about
something
Josh
dark
is
about
creepy.
him. And I mean, if my mom and my sisters and my best friends told me that about a guy,
if they told you that about me,
I would seriously be
okay,
reconsidering, you know.
Yeah.
I would
what do they see
really
that I
have
don't
to take
see?
a look.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, I get that you can
You don't choose who you fall in love with sometimes.
No, and I get that you can know a deeper side of somebody than, like, your family member can know them. Like, I know that I know more about you, Jack, than my family knows about you.
Yeah.
But it's not like you're two different people when you're around them versus with me. You know, you're not hiding parts of yourself. I just am with you all the time.
But they can also see your potential suitors in a different light than you can.
Yeah.
So
it just is weird and sad and ugh.
Let's press on.
So after Susan and Josh got married, they ended up living with Stephen for a little while because, Stephen was living by himself at this point after the divorce, and Stephen is
not a stable person to be
he's
around.
Not. He is disgusting.
Yeah, he's a creep.
And he was in love with Susan as well.
This guy is just one of those people who...
I think, again, he's possessive.
Yeah, well...
He's controlling. He and Josh, I think, had a very codependent relationship.
Yeah.
That stemmed from the abuse, you know, which I think is, like, the one part missing from the real serial killer soup. Is that a lot of the serial killers that have the same issues growing up as Josh did don't have any kind of close connection with somebody.
They don't have
with a parental figure,
or
especially.
their siblings.
But Josh did.
Yeah.
He and Steve were close.
And he was very close to his brother Michael.
And horrible as it was, they were close. You know? Anyways, Stephen was in love with Susan.
Which is just so fucked up. Like,
yep.
Like,
your daughter-in-law.
That is no. That is off limits and horrific.
There's a quote from his journal that says, when Josh first brought her home, I didn't think much of her. I didn't think she was that pretty or anything. Now I can't take my eyes off her.
Which tells me that he has a pathology. Anyone female who enters his orbit
is his now.
Yeah, there's a possession thing. Yep. And that is...
Which we'll talk about a little later with his neighbors creepy. As well. They're just in his
view, sphere,
in his circle, and that makes them his. Ugh, but anyways...
It doesn't matter if they're his kids, if they're his daughter-in-law, if they're...
just any woman.
Parts of his wife that he probably shouldn't have.
Yep.
He gets them.
Yep.
And he wants them.
Ugh.
It's pathological.
Yeah.
And it is.
Something and he became obsessed. It's an obsession, pathological obsession. Exactly.
Because that's where he gains his power. Yep. That's where he feels his strongest when he possesses.
Yep. And there's a quote from a report, too, that says He developed an obsessive infatuation with her, which was only inflamed by their close proximity. So, of course,
So, living in
Susan
her
is like the
house.
first woman that he's really gotten close to at all. And I mean that literally. He was around her a lot since his divorce. So, yeah, this whole disgusting want of her came to be.
And this is not just like speculation. This is confirmed.
This is true.
This is in his journals. Are you planning on talking about what he said to her in the car that one time?
Maybe.
Okay.
There's a lot that I'm talking about.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
It is not. This is not like. This isn't juicy drama.
Mm-hmm.
This is verified fact.
Yeah. I have a couple audio clips that we'll be playing in this episode for our first audio episode, which is fun. But also, like we said before, if you want to just dig more into this case, there's so much more that you can find than we're even going to talk about today. But there are lots of videos that Stephen has taken too, because the family was really into journaling, like we said.
And photo documentation.
And photojournaling was a part of that.
Video.
There's lots of video diaries of themselves. So you can look into that a little bit more too. But anyway, some of the stuff that Stephen would do to Susan. He would follow her around the house with a camcorder, often when she was unaware, and he would zoom in on various body parts.
Gross.
Like her butt, her legs, up close on her face, her breasts, anything, just whatever he felt like that day.
He's making his own stupid amateur pornography.
He would sneak into their room and read her journals. He used a small mirror to look under the door when she was in the bathroom.
Ew.
He would steal underwear from her laundry. And he would even steal her garbage, like used tampons, floss, Q-tips, stuff like that. And he kept them in bags under his bed. And he would date them. The day that he took them, he would keep like that.
This is like 4 steps beyond unhealthy. Like,
oh, it's horrible.
He's gross.
And now, Steve, he considered himself somewhat of like a musical protege.
What was his musical stage name?
It was Stephen Chantry.
Oh, wow. Super cool.
So he liked to write songs and compose songs. And once Susan moved into his house and he began this obsession with her, every song that he was writing was about her.
Ugh.
So I'm going to play you my first little audio clip here that is a song that Steve recorded that Susan actually helped record. She does some of the backup vocals in it, but she, of course, didn't know it was about her. And this was near the beginning of the relationship before things had really gotten so overpoweringly weird that she did help him. But here's the first little clip.
And I only feel love. I may have seemed clumsy, I didn't move fast. A love that came slow is a love that will last. It's plain to me too that all that you do has made me love you. I only feel love. I only feel love.
He only feels love. How long are you gonna make us listen to this?
I'm sorry.
It's so
I had to
bad.
play the whole thing because it is so bad.
What is this dollar store David Bowie bullshit?
Oh my god. So that song was called I Only Feel Love.
Oh yeah.
The first time I heard that, I really couldn't believe it. Like, it's horrible. It's disgusting.
And it's just poorly made. Like,
I know.
mean, that might be the biggest crime here.
Yeah. So like I said, that one's called I Only Feel Love. There's a big long list that you can find of all the songs that he had written about Susan because he kept like a spreadsheet of them.
Of course he did. Totally normal.
Some of the other titles that stuck out to me. I was about to say my favorite titles, but that is not accurate because they're horrible. The ones that stuck out to me were I Said I Love You. Is That a Sin?
Yes, it is when it's your fucking daughter-in-law.
A Dream Waiting to Happen.
Ugh.
warmth and comfort for his bed,
Oh, fuck me.
and cock tease.
What? And cock tease comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like, it's the only one that's, like,
Outright
pornographic. Yeah.
vulgar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he wrote all those about his daughter-in-law.
Jesus Christ.
I mean...
So we can understand a little bit if Josh is a little fucked up.
Yeah. I mean,
We
it's
can
still
understand.
his fault. What he does is still his own fault.
He made his own choices, but you start a few feet behind all the other racers when you grow up in a family like this. That's for sure.
Yeah. A funny thing about the songs, Steven wrote in his journal once that he had been showing some of the songs to Josh and his other son Michael, and Michael called him Nostradamus, and Steve himself said, "I prefer to be called Nostra Goddamus." So
I am hurt by this. You have hurt me.
I know. That's why he called himself.
What the hell? That is some BTK level garbage.
Nostra Goddamus.
Goddamus. Wow.
I died when I read that. It's so horrible. I'm sorry for laughing. This case is so sad, but
how do you get this crazy?
I don't know. And he even wrote in another journal entry of his that what I've written about Susan represents the first time I've mentioned fetishes and what might be considered sociopathic. I mean, who looks under the bathroom door with a mirror? I tend to think a lot of guys do.
No, they really don't.
No.
I'll be a representative for my particular gender. We don't do that because that's creepy as shit.
Yeah. That was written on January 11th in 2003.
Okay.
And another entry from February 24th, 2003 says, "It's very problematic to be madly in love with your son's wife. I'm so madly in love with Susan that I would do something desperate to have her." So, I mean, the stuff he's writing, he knows. He's fucked up.
Yeah.
But he didn't
chooses
He didn't care enough,
do
so
that.
he kept doing it.
Well, I heard a quick thing about Steven's background, that his dad and his mom were divorcing each other, which back then was like
when
a
Steven's
huge
parents
deal.
would be divorcing.
His dad kidnapped him and his siblings, like during the divorce
I feel
proceedings.
like I heard about that, actually.
And his dad was like, "I'll kill you before I let her take you," and like, it was all wrapped up, and like,
it's definitely a cyclical generational abuse.
Yes, and when the police were involved and he was returned to his mom, he was mad at his mom because his mom made his dad the bad guy for kidnapping them.
Wow.
So there's like
some serious brainwashing.
Yes,
in there.
so this is just the cycle of abuse from history, like all the way down the line.
Yeah,
until we get to Josh.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play another audio clip here in just a second.
Why must you hurt us in this way?
Another horrible example.
Oh man, okay.
Once Steven offered to give Susan a massage.
Gross.
And again, like, this is like earlier on. It's
Susan's
like,
in a new marriage
weird.
and she doesn't want to make things terrible.
Yeah, and so he offers just to rub her legs and shoulders and stuff. And this is one of the video entries that he made. And let me play you the audio first. So
okay.
I'll tell you a little bit more.
I just had what is probably the most erotic experience I've had in my entire life. I just hate to say it. I mean, of course, because I haven't had that many experiences, but Susan has been feeling ill. She had a cold. And I offered to rub her feet, to rub her toes, to give her some stimulation. I probably rubbed her feet, her toes, her beautiful feet. She has such pretty feet. Of course, everything about her is pretty beautiful. And I know she felt it. I mean, I know she couldn't have missed it. She's not naive either. I know from what I've read in her journals. That girl is not naive. When I started massaging her legs, I would have loved to go all the way up her legs, but I did do her calves. because her.
So I'll spare you the rest of the video.
Holy shit.
But I just want to say that in that video, he continues talking about how she was purposefully using her feet to, like, rub against his crotch, and how he just wanted to keep going up and up her legs and touch her crotch and just rub her more. And and throughout this video, it's a video, not just a recording, it's an actual video of Steve. He undresses throughout the whole time. It's like a 3-minute video, and he's talking about this, and he strips down to his underwear during this, and it is like one of the most horrifying things I've ever
subjected myself to. It's like something out of Buffalo Bill's basement.
It's horrible.
Yikes. Ugh.
It's horrible.
Stephen Powell makes me want to barf.
Yeah, me too.
I am nauseous a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you true crime people, like, we hear some gross details sometimes, but this is just so sustained and sexually gross, and just it makes me extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah. Later on in 2003 is when Stephen decided to finally confess his feelings to Susan. She of course rejected him.
Yeah, this is the car stuff. Yep.
Yeah. A lot of this was captured on Stephen's camcorder microphone.
Yeah, the lens cap was still on.
If you want to listen to the audio at all.
He accidentally left it on.
Yeah.
He did not mean to record this. They were driving back from somewhere, and it was Stephen manipulated the circumstances so he and Susan would be alone in the car through this drive. So essentially she'd be trapped with him. And he confessed his love to her, and Susan, of course, is horrified. You can hear it in her voice, like, and she essentially does her best to de-escalate everything and be like, obviously you can tell she's totally taken off guard. She's in shock.
Yeah.
And she's just like, I'm married to your son. Obviously nothing is going to happen.
But he just didn't believe it, and he continued to claim that she wanted to have an affair with him.
Which is a typical abusive thing. Like, oh, that's not what you really want. I know what you really want.
Yeah.
And that led to them moving out of Stevens.
Yes, and they moved to Utah.
Yeah.
Where Josh's older sister Jennifer lived.
Yeah.
And where they had a little bit of family still down there to be around.
Yes.
So
yeah. Well, and they're Mormon, and Mormons live in Utah.
Yeah, of course. So it was natural to go
That's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Like I said, Steve continued to stay in love with Susan and think that she wanted to have an affair with him, and he described her as a very sexual person.
And he kept this up.
Oh, for forever.
To a degree where even when they had their boys.
Yep. And he also he would, like, manipulate Photoshop pornographic images.
So he'd shop
of
her
women
face.
to have Susan's face on them. Ugh. And there were also photos and videos of himself masturbating to videos of Susan. I didn't look for those.
Oh, obviously.
I'm not going to.
Yikes.
I don't know if they are online. I don't care if they're online.
They probably shouldn't
I'm not
be.
going to look. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's just some of the horrible stuff that Stephen was.
Yeah. And she, it was no secret that is why she left. Jennifer knew.
Yep.
Josh definitely knew. But Josh maintained a relationship over the phone with his dad after all this. He did not say, oh, wow, my dad did that. Let's never speak to him again.
Yeah.
It was, oh, you must have kind of misinterpreted things. He took his dad's side through all of this.
Ugh.
It makes me want to bark.
Okay, so they moved out in 2003. Moved to Utah. And they had their first son, named Charlie in 2005.
Which I think is named after her dad, right? Chuck?
His name is Charles.
Her dad.
And her dad's name is Charles Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck and Charlie.
And that's adorable.
It's really cute. And Chuck is such a good person. We'll hear more about him in the future. Chuck is amazing.
Yeah. So they had their first son, Charlie, in January 2005.
Okay.
And then their second son, Braden, also in January of 2007.
Oh, man. All these Capricorns.
So,
I guess Josh is
2 Capricorns and Aquarius.
All in January, though.
Yep.
That's funny.
So And Susan loved being a mom. Like, that is the
That
one
was her
thing that
life.
people always say about Susan, is that is what she always wanted to be, and she loved it, and she loved her boys more than anything, which I love and also hate right now.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that humanizes Susan more than anything, because
Oh, it
so
really
many people
does.
can just
Yeah.
totally understand a mom being in a bad situation.
Let's just take a second to talk about Susan a little bit, and
Yeah.
like the type of person she was, right?
Yeah,
So,
we haven't really dug into her very much.
Susan was very kind. You know, all her friends say about her. She was very smart and very outgoing.
Very extroverted.
One woman in particular, her name is Kiersey Hellowell,
Who was one of her friends from here in Utah.
who we also met at the memorial on Friday, who was very, very cool. I think was Susan's best friend. She said Susan was her best friend.
Yeah.
They were in the same ward. They would go to church together, and they got along really well. And
She lived 5 doors down
Yeah.
from the
and
Powells.
Kiersey says when she first met Susan, she did not think they were going to be friends, because she was a little more reserved, a little more shy,
And a little
Susan
bit of a
was
girly
just
girl.
outgoing, and
Susan was very into hair and makeup and, you know,
Susan, she
traditionally female
did
things.
work as a cosmetologist a little bit.
Yeah, she
could
went
do
to
hair and
beauty
stuff.
school and everything.
At
like
this time in Utah, though, she was working at Wells Fargo, I believe.
Wells
She
Fargo
was working
Investments.
in investments.
Yeah.
But she really liked makeup. She really liked hair, stuff like that. And she was just very outgoing and bubbly. And Kiersey was not. She's a little more reserved. But she said Susan just came right up to her and started talking. And then they were friends. And they were going to stay friends.
I think that a lot of people who think they aren't going to be friends with someone, I feel like those friendships are
Yeah.
often stronger than
I think so,
the
too.
common sense friendships.
Yeah, I think so too. And have you ever heard that saying that's like, the way an introvert makes friends is that an extrovert decides that they like them, and that's it.
Yeah,
And
that's how
I think
introverts
that totally,
make friends. Yeah.
that's totally how I feel. You know, I'm a super introvert, and I feel like that it reminded me of that quote, to hear Kiersey talk about how her and Susan became friends,
Yeah.
which was super cute, I thought. And another story that Kiersey told us that I just thought was amazing was one day when she was trying to clean out the shed that she had in her backyard. She had a lot of like dusty boxes, just old stuff in
From
there,
stuff when she'd moved.
Yeah.
So it'd been there forever.
She started to have a severe asthma attack. So bad that she almost had to go to the emergency room, she said, but she was able to like go back into her house and calm down just a little bit, you know. And a little while later, Susan just came by and was knocking on the door, and I was just like, hey, how are you? And she's like, oh, I'm not doing very good. I'm having an asthma attack, and I'm really just exhausted now. And Susan's like, oh my gosh, like, is there anything I can do for you? What were you doing? What's going on? And Kiersey's like, no, I'm fine now. I just need to relax a little while. I was just trying to clean out my shed, and this happened. And Susan was like, oh, well, I'll clean your shed for you.
Yeah.
And Kiersey said, no, you don't have to do it. And Susan said, well, I'm going to. So come out here with me, and you can sit in the fresh air and the sun and tell me what to do, and I will clean it. And she did.
Yeah.
Kiersey says she spent the whole rest of the day and finished cleaning her shed for her while Kiersey just, relaxed in her backyard.
Yeah.
And that was just the type of person she was. She said she did that for her friends all the time and was always doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if nothing else speaks to her character, that does.
Yeah. She's a genuinely good person. So
Mhm.
she was the kind of person that I think being good to other people came more naturally to her than anything else.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, Susan did not have like an amazing home life because of Josh.
Yeah, Josh and her relationship was pretty contentious. I mean, you obviously
he's
if
extremely
your
controlling.
husband takes your dad's side on that scenario, like, things are not good, and that was just indicative of the whole thing.
Yeah. He was super financially controlling.
Yes.
And that's a big thing they talked about at the memorial, was the financial abuse that she struggled through.
It's one of the first things that happens in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, and like we were talking about before, a lot of the money that they had was her money. Yes. She was working too.
Yeah, Josh wasn't doing very high paying jobs.
No.
And she was in investments. She was doing pretty well.
So Susan, just some examples. She had her own car, and Josh had his own car when they moved to Utah. And he sold Susan's car and made her bike 7 fucking miles
through hills and the
on
snow
a busy
occasionally.
road with no bike lane to work. She had to go there early in the morning through whatever kind of weather. 7 miles.
Yeah, and she has kids.
On her bike.
Like, it's not like, jeez.
And he was so controlling that she couldn't even feed her family correctly.
She couldn't control the money
No.
to buy groceries on her own. Josh had to help her.
And Josh, when she asked, for money for food, he would just tell her stuff like, oh, they can just split a hot dog for dinner. These two little boys can just split a hot dog for dinner?
Yeah, sure.
Like, but of course Josh got to do whatever he wanted. He would buy himself snacks. He'd buy his own food. He had thousands and thousands of dollars worth of computers and
and video equipment and camping
toys
equipment and generators and four-wheelers, and just he got whatever he wanted, and his family was always second fiddle to him because he was a classic narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. But he was never he might have been diagnosed actually later on.
I don't think so. I haven't heard anything about it.
I'll get into that a little bit. It's much later on in the case, but
and it got so bad with their money impact that in 2007, right after their second boy was born, Josh filed bankruptcy.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
And he declared over $200,000 of debt.
So he went into debt for all the garbage he bought.
Oh yeah.
Jeez.
Oh, for sure.
Jeez.
Yeah. Susan started going to counseling by herself. Through a little bit, she was encouraged to, through her church. And she really liked it. She thought it was really helpful. And she often asked Josh to join her, but of course he never did.
No, Josh would have to admit defeat to do something like that.
Yeah. One of these sessions, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, went with her.
Mm-hmm.
And the counselor was talking to them both about how they really felt that Susan was being abused and needed help. And Chuck absolutely agreed. And now this, I found in one report, but I haven't heard about it a ton. So it's possible this may be incorrect, but I wanted to just mention it, just if it is true. I thought it was very interesting that Chuck bought her an emergency cell phone.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
That they paid for so that Josh wouldn't see that it existed.
Interesting. So so it wouldn't show up in their bills.
Yeah. So like I said, I was only really able to find that in one report, so I don't know.
That sounds like something Chuck would do.
Yeah, it does. So I just thought that was interesting.
Very interesting.
Yep.
And we do know that there was one reported within the family, not obviously to the police, instance of violence among the two of them.
Yes.
Susan and Josh came to blows, I imagine, somewhat regularly.
Yeah, there's one time for sure that we know about that they both were in a fight.
And Jennifer, who's Josh's sister, who is very much an advocate for Susan, said that Susan actually started. She
hit Josh.
She hit Josh first, and then Josh hit back.
Yeah.
And
you should never hit your spouse. You should never hit anybody.
No, wives shouldn't hit their husbands, and husbands shouldn't hit their wives. And decent humans shouldn't hit other decent humans.
No. But I mean, if there's one time that other people know about, there's more times that people don't know about.
In abusive relationships, the only reason this came up is because Susan was so thrown by the whole thing, she called Jennifer up and had Jennifer mediate.
Yep.
And if it got so bad that she called someone else, must have been a particularly bad example.
Yes.
But if it's coming to blows, that means it's already been emotional abuse for some time.
Yes.
And if it's come to blows, then that Rubicon has already been passed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the dynamic, is abuse.
Yep. So. Another time that she went to another person was in June of 2008.
So about 18 months before she disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay.
In June 2008, she went over again to her friend Kiersey Hellowell's house and just handed her a notepad and said, I want you to write all this down because it's the worst argument Josh and I have ever had and I want evidence of it happening. So Kiersey just talked about how upsetting that was for her, that
I can only imagine it. If one of my friends came up to me and told me that, I would be heartbroken and terrified for them.
But of course she did. She wrote it for Susan to have that. And then a couple weeks later in July, and Susan recorded a video that nobody knew about, unfortunately, until after her disappearance. Yeah. Surveying all the property that she had, everything that they owned, and made a secret will saying, I want it documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage. And if I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one.
Yeah.
So she even said that.
Yes.
You know?
And
And I mean, it's
recording the stuff is a pre-divorce
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And because she did go to a lawyer.
Yeah.
She was encouraged
For
to go
that,
to a lawyer.
well, you have
and
to for a
finally
will
did.
usually.
Yeah, but I mean, she went to a lawyer to talk about her options as far as divorce
Oh,
goes.
yeah.
And the lawyer told her to begin documenting all
Absolutely.
this stuff so that in the divorce she could get at least
So
half,
Josh
you know,
couldn't
wouldn't
hide
just
this
be-
stuff.
Yeah, and that was the point of
Basically.
this. Which just leads me to think that there was even more stuff that we still don't know about going on in their
Oh,
marriage.
yeah.
Because, like, if you are just creating a document of your property
Mm-hmm.
because you're looking for divorce, you're just wanting to make sure you get what you deserve in a divorce,
Yeah,
you're not thinking about dying.
No, you're
You're
thinking
not-
about...
You're just thinking about getting out and making sure you get what's yours.
Yeah.
You're not preparing for the worst.
But
in
she
that
also was
instance.
preparing for the worst.
But she was.
Yeah.
And she says, if I die, it may not be an accident.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, just to even be in that state of mind, like,
Yeah.
there is so much
She's
shit going on.
living day to day in mortal fear.
Yes.
So it's not just, to put it lightly,
Mm-hmm.
run-of-the-mill domestic abuse. This is life and death.
Yep.
It's, intimate partner violence.
Yep. A couple months after that, Josh purchased a life insurance policy for Susan.
Of how much?
$1 million.
1.5.
$1.5 million.
Which
fucking
you will
dollars.
note is a lot more than most people put
Yeah,
in their life
And
insurance
Susan
policies.
knew about this, and she even made in another journal entry that this didn't make sense unless he expected something to happen to her.
Yeah.
In August 2009, Susan told her friends that she had set an ultimatum with Josh, that if he continued refusing to go to church with her, because in that time he had stopped attending church services,
Mhm.
if he didn't start going to counseling with her, if he didn't start shaping up by their anniversary in April of the next year, that she would
was
divorce
gonna
him.
leave him.
She was gonna leave.
Yeah.
And then she disappeared.
Okay, so the day is Sunday, December 6, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Susan and her sons were seen on 2 occasions this day. First, they attended church services at their local ward in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Josh was not there. Of course, he did not go with them. Later that day, Susan was visited by a neighbor. Her name is Giovanna Owings. During this visit, Josh was being weirdly cordial to his family, like
really
happy and caring and putting on a little show for Giovanna since she's over there.
Mm-hmm.
So Susan was acting really lethargic and tired.
Mhm.
We don't know if this was chemically induced.
Josh was making pancakes.
Josh was making pancakes.
And Giovanna said that was weird because
He never cooks.
He never
Yep.
cooks for the family.
But he's cooking pancakes this day. And I think he'd actually called Jennifer for a pancake recipe the day before.
Yep.
Which a lot of people are like, maybe he poisoned the pancakes, or maybe he like dosed them with something to put like make her lethargic. I don't know, and we don't know. And they checked the pancakes and during the course of the investigation in the garbage.
And I mean, they
But
left
he
in the
only
house,
might
but
have
there's
poisoned
nothing-
her pancake. I don't know.
We don't know.
I think it could be kind of a red herring. Susan had earlier that day confided in Giovanna that she might have actually had a miscarriage earlier that month.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of attributed her lethargicness to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is really sad.
Sad.
That might have been one of the reasons why Susan was even willing to give him an ultimatum, is because she thought she might have been pregnant.
Yep.
So she said she felt tired and she was just going to go to another room to nap while Giovanna kept working on the project they were working on together.
Mm-hmm.
About an hour later, Josh told Giovanna that he was going to take the boys sledding, and Giovanna's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And he's like, I'm going to lock up before I leave.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh,
So he
and
kind
she
of
got
like
the
was
clue.
rushing or getting her
got
out
the
of
clue
house.
to get her out of the house. And so she left around 5:30 p.m. And that is the last time that Susan Powell was seen by anyone outside of her very immediate family of Josh and the boys.
And I want to just tell another quick little story that Kiersey Hallowell told us at the memorial that I just thought was so sad. She and Susan walked home from church together that day. And we've talked about this before, that the victim is never the only victim of
Yeah.
a crime like this.
Absolutely.
And I think this is just a perfect example because Kiersey, she says when she and Susan walked home, Susan was, not her normal happy self, not like quite as exuberant, but not anything like alarming.
Mm-hmm.
But Kiersey said that she was thinking, maybe I should invite her over.
For dinner or something.
They hadn't been able to hang out as much recently.
Kiersey had been working on some family drama.
Yeah, and so she's thinking, maybe I should invite her over tonight and just hang out for a little bit. But then she thought to herself, well, I'm feeling really tired today. I'm dealing with a lot of stuff right now. I'll just invite her over on Wednesday, which is the next day she has off work. So I'll do that later. And
she never got the chance.
That was her last interaction with Susan. And I just think that is like one of the saddest things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Like the guilt that she could have felt, or the what if question that if she had been over at her house, what would have happened? Or,
absolutely.
I just think that's horrible. So sad.
Yeah. So the night happens, and no one in the community of West Valley knows what occurred during that night.
Mm-hmm.
The disappearance of Susan started expanding beyond those directly involved very early on Monday morning when Susan and Josh didn't drop off Charlie and Braden at daycare when they usually did at exactly 6:40 on the dot.
With Debbie Caldwell.
Debbie Caldwell.
She's a badass.
Is insanely cool. She is very committed to the families that she works with.
We also got to see her.
We got to see Debbie at the memorial. I'll get into it. Josh usually picked up the boys in the afternoon because Susan was still working.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why they drop off the boys together is because usually
Debbie knew about Susan having to ride her bike to work.
Yes, and usually Debbie didn't open up her doors until 7, but she had worked out an arrangement with Josh and Susan to drop off the boys early because Josh needed to drop off Susan at work because they only had the one minivan.
Yeah, so Debbie herself had said, if you drop Susan off at work, if you drive her to work, then I'll let you drop the boys off earlier.
Yes. So, Debbie was more of an advocate for Susan than Josh.
She's a great feminist.
Yeah. Josh usually picked up the boys. He often did so late, and he also often did so in an irritating manner, and that earned him the nickname Rocks for Brains among daycare staff. Also because he never shut up about rocks.
Oh my God.
He was super into not geology, but just like gems and rocks, and he's just a completely insufferable dickhead. So understandably concerned because they dropped them off like clockwork at 6:40 every day because Susan's on top of her own family.
Yeah. And if they weren't going to, Susan would have called.
Yes,
Debbie says
absolutely.
always, if they were going to be late, if they weren't going to come that day, Susan would have let her know.
So Debbie called their home phone and didn't get an answer. Then she remembered, the home phone only rings in Josh's basement office. So she tried both of their cell phones. Neither of those rang. So she tried Susan's office number, and she had Susan's office number. That didn't work. So obviously Debbie's concern is growing.
Yes.
She even so when all those numbers ran out, she loaded the other 6 kids that she was watching that day into the van that she uses, and she drove over there. She was a little bit worried that there might have been like a carbon monoxide poisoning thing because Josh had asked her and her husband about fixing their furnace a couple weeks ago. So she was worried that Josh had fixed the furnace wrong and there was a carbon monoxide leak. So she and the 6 children pulled up to the house, and there were no. It had snowed that night. We talked about.
Big storm had come through.
6 inches of snow on the driveways and everywhere, and there were no footprints coming out of the house, and there was no tire tracks, so no one had left the house at all.
Or gone into the house.
Or gone into that house this morning. So she walked up to the door, knocked, and didn't get a response. And so that fear of maybe it's a carbon monoxide thing kind of grew in her, so she ran into the van and got pulled out the emergency binder that she had in the van. This lady is like so on top of things. Like she has so many resources. It's really cool.
Which I love when you're taking care of kids. You gotta know how to help them.
Seriously, you have to be the adult.
Yep.
So she got into the emergency contacts, and she called Josh's sister Jennifer, who actually apparently didn't answer the first time.
No, she didn't answer.
But eventually, Jennifer and her mom Terry.
Because Terry's down in Utah.
Terry has now moved down to Utah. So Jennifer is obviously concerned when she hears that the daycare provider is super scared about what's going on. So they drive over. On their way, Jennifer calls the police and says, "Hey, my brother and his wife and their kids are nowhere to be found."
Yep.
So, let's see, I've lost my place. After the police checked the doors and the windows, which were all blinded and closed and shut off.
Yep.
And they are fearing that carbon monoxide thing. The police just were kind of forced to break the window and jump in. So they didn't see anyone in the house. The minivan was gone out of the garage. And interestingly, 2 box fans were blowing on the living room carpet and couch.
The freshly cleaned living room carpet and couch.
There's a rug doctor that someone had used to clean the couch and the carpet. So that's really fucking suspicious.
Yep.
Let's see. There was also a stereo blasting talk radio, like someone was trying to cover for the fact that they weren't home. And Susan wasn't found in the house, but of course, but Jennifer went up to their bedroom and found that Susan's purse was there.
Yep.
Which, if Susan was going anywhere, obviously she would take her purse. Her wallet and ID were in the purse, but her phone was not in the purse. Interestingly. So, obviously we now have a missing persons investigation. So the Powell house.
But Josh is also missing, and Brayden and Charlie, they're all gone.
Yeah, missing persons, plural.
Persons,
yeah,
yes.
We have Josh, Susan, Charlie, and Brayden all missing. So the Powell house becomes kind of a beehive of police activity and neighbor activity. Kirsty's been called by the police. You've got Debbie's involved, Teresa and Jennifer, or Terry and Jennifer are involved. And it's chaos.
Yes.
Everyone's calling everyone. Everyone's calling Josh specifically because, and Susan's cell phones because they can't find either of those phones. And everyone's trying to put it together and figure out what happened. Kirsty's scared that they took off late on Sunday night and maybe their car crashed and they're stuck out in the cold somewhere. Yep. Finally, around 3 p.m., Josh called Jennifer, and Jennifer said that he couldn't figure out what was going on. Like she said he was really vague and evasive. Very evasive. He kind of useless and didn't really say what was happening.
Useless is exactly right.
Yeah. And then she transferred him over to Ellis. Detective Ellis. That's his first name. I'm actually blanking on his last name. Ellis something. Maxwell. Ellis Maxwell, who is the lead investigator on the case going forward for the West Valley City Police. So when he gets on the phone with Ellis, Ellis is like, where are you? And he's like, oh, we're coming back. We've been out camping. And I gotta feed the boys before I come home.
He and the boys.
Yes.
He and Charlie and Brayden.
Right. So, and the guy's like, dude, like, there's a giant missing persons thing going on here. Like, I need you to come back now. Like, we don't really have time for you to stop for food. So, he stopped for food.
Yeah.
He stopped and got a Little Caesars hot and ready.
He stopped and bought them food.
Yeah,
instead of just making them split a hot dog at home.
Crazy, I know.
What?
So, 3 hours later.
Oh my god.
It's dark.
So it took 3 hours to stop and get a pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Right.
3 hours later, it's dark already. It's cold. It is really, really cold. It's so cold that 6 inches of snow is all powder in the valley, which is like, it's freezing outside.
Yeah. And
neighbors and family and police are all like really concerned about the safety of this family, and Josh is just like fucking around. At 6:40, a minivan pulled into the neighborhood. A minivan which contained Josh, Charlie, and Brayden, but not Susan Cox Powell. So, the police brought him into the station. Hey,
Yeah.
where's your wife, motherfucker?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. I just get...
Didn't Josh also make a couple calls on his drive back?
He called Jennifer.
Well, didn't he call Jennifer and, they told him, like, you guys are missing, what's happening, where's Susan? She asked where Susan was, and he said, well, she should be at work, right? And Jennifer's like, no, she's not at work, we don't know where any of you are. And he's like, well, okay, well, I just have to stop and get my boys their food really fast.
He was always dismissive. He never directly
but then,
addressed it.
they checked his cell phone records, and when he was out driving, he called Susan's work.
And her phone.
And her cell phone saying, hey, hope you made it to work okay. Even though they already fucking told him that she hadn't.
And he already knew that something was going on.
Yeah.
So,
like, I don't know, but it sounds a little bit like somebody's trying to cover his tracks.
yes. Okay. So here's the tale that Josh tells the police when he arrives at the police station that night.
Oh my god.
Detective Ellis said that he was always really vague and useless.
Mm-hmm.
He told them that after Giovanna had left that day, he had taken Charlie sledding, and then he returned home. Susan then woke up when they arrived home, because we know she'd gone and taken a nap. She ate a hot dog. Freaking hot dogs. I don't know. And then she went back for another nap, and he put the kids to bed, which obviously he never did. He never put the kids to bed. It was always Susan. At 10 p.m. on a Sunday night, Susan woke up and asked him to clean the couch with a rug doctor, which is something people totally do. He did so, and then he left home with his sons around midnight to go camping.
Yep.
On a Sunday night,
Well,
when he has work in the morning.
Have you never done
No, I haven't done that.
that? Oh, you know what? Neither have I.
Yeah, because that's not a thing people do ever.
Nope.
So, he said that he left around 12:30. Susan was asleep, and they went camping over in Tooele County near Simpson Springs. He
in
said,
what county?
Tooele County.
Cool.
Yeah. There's only one way to get to Tooele County.
Yes, there is, and I am very familiar with that ride.
So let's keep that in mind. There's only one direction to take, and I'll dig into that in a second. He said he didn't realize it was Monday until he had woken up with the boys late Monday morning, like 11 in the morning, because he'd gotten out there like 3 in the morning. So at that point he figured the damage was done with the work and everything, missing work that day. So he said he drove around the campground for a few hours. They roasted marshmallows for a minute, and when quote unquote when that got old, they started driving back around 2 p.m. He said he stopped at a car wash in Lehigh, which you'll know is not from the direction.
Back from Tooele.
Nope, it is from somewhere else.
It is so from West Valley and Salt Lake, which is where the Powells lived. Tooele is west.
Yes.
About 40 minutes worth of driving.
And you just have to go around a mountain real quick.
Lehigh is south.
Like another 40 minutes.
40 minutes south.
Lehigh is not on the way back.
You have to go
Tooele.
over a mountain to get to Lehigh.
Yeah.
Around a mountain to get to Tooele.
Yeah. It doesn't. The geography of this does not make any sense.
There's absolutely no way. Yeah. There is like a back way that you could go from Tooele to Lehigh.
But not if it had snowed 6 inches.
But not if it had snowed 6 inches, and it's not like an easy direct route. It's not like, Tooele, Lehigh.
It's a winding trail.
Oh, Tooele, Eureka, all the way down through 1,000 different places. Goshen.
Yeah.
Maybe even to San Quentin if you miss a turn.
Yeah.
Then to Lehigh.
Yeah.
I've done those rides a lot.
And none of this makes sense.
No.
This is the huge hole.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't make sense to go to a car wash when it's snowing in Utah.
No, it does not.
Your car is going to be dirty the second you pull it out of the car wash.
Yes, it is.
Unless you're trying to wash something off your car because it's incriminating. So, he also said that his phone had just died and he didn't have a charger, even though there was a charger in the car that they found. So, he said that his phone had died because it was trying to find a signal when he was out in the desert.
Right.
He finally, when he got into town, he charged his phone. He had called Jennifer, and he'd called Susan's phones for some reason. And then he stopped for pizza, and then he came back.
Mm-hmm.
None of that makes any sense.
No, it does not.
When Josh was asked where Susan's phone was, he said he didn't know. When he was asked for permission to search the minivan, he very cautiously agreed, but he insisted on being there as it was being searched. And so Detective Ellis, not wanting to make like a scene, he's like, all right, whatever, we'll do this. So they take Josh to the police garage, and they perform a search on the minivan, and they open up all the doors and hatches of the minivan.
Mm-hmm.
Josh jumps right into the driver's seat. Right, like, not something, like, if you're performing a search with police and your car is being searched or something, like, that's not, I don't think that's
you step back.
Yeah, you're like, all right, have at it, guys.
Oh,
Not Josh. The van was full of hand tools, power tools, and mostly unopened camping equipment, including a gas can and a generator.
Mm-hmm.
There was a bunch of stuff for the boys. There was, like, clothes and blankets and toys and some, like, food, like graham crackers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But, most importantly, deep down in the center console, under everything else in the console, was a pink Motorola cell phone.
Oh my god.
When Detective Ellis is like, Josh, why do you have Susan's cell phone? He said, he spun another little story, and he said, I borrowed it from Susan yesterday because I needed to copy some cell phone numbers out of it, and I must have put it in my pocket and forgotten about it.
Oh my god.
And then when Detective Ellis was like, it was in the console, not in your pocket. Like, you would have had to have known to take it out of your pocket and put it in the console, so why didn't you mention this earlier, you stupid asshole?
Why did you call it?
He left several voicemails on that phone that he knew was in that console that afternoon, asking where Susan was. In response to the obvious he said, I guess I just forgot I put it in the console. Deflection, evasion, vague, useless answers.
Wow.
When his wife's life is on the line.
Wow.
In law enforcement, a story with this many glaring holes and vagaries and outright lies is called suspicious as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, being incredibly suspicious is not evidence, and it's not enough to arrest someone and put them on trial. So the investigation into Josh Powell began. He was called into, when he left that day, he was told to come back the next day at 9 a.m. for more questioning.
And he showed up when?
He was supposed to come in at 9, the day after his wife's disappearance. And so he didn't show up at 9. Calls again went unanswered to Josh's cell phone. For someone who just lost his wife, he didn't seem too concerned about aiding the police efforts to find her. Josh wasn't sleeping in, though. At 8 a.m., he was thoroughly cleaning his entire house, which he never did. Yep. He was thoroughly cleaning the family minivan, which he also never did. And doing laundry, which he
never did.
Got it. He didn't arrive at the police station until noon, 3 hours late.
Noon.
If the police told me I needed to be somewhere at 9,
I'd be there.
I'd probably be there at 8:30. Yeah, I'd be like,
there at 8:30.
I don't think I'm gonna fuck around here. Yeah. What he was doing during that time, he was canceling Susan's regular chiropractic appointments and canceling the daycare with Debbie.
Oh my god.
So anything that cost money.
Priorities.
He's like, oh yeah, well if Susan's not around, she's not gonna need these
chiropractic appointment. Oh, that's such a concern of mine.
Yeah,
right now.
I should really take care of that. The doctor's gonna bill me if she's doesn't show up.
Gonna be upset if she misses an appointment.
Yeah, Josh is a total piece of shit, by the way. In case you hadn't noticed.
Josh shit.
That was good. That was a good attempt. Okay. So he didn't get there until noon, and the first thing that he mentioned when he gets there is that he had gotten a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what innocent people do.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the previous night, where he had appeared very, standoffish and shrugging, he appeared very emotional and stiffly.
Yeah, and
my wife is gone.
Shut up.
Yeah. And he appeared that way until the real questions about Susan's disappearance started.
Mm-hmm.
Josh started filling in the investigators on his background. Because the investigators didn't have the nice little background piece that you put together for us. Thank you very much. At one point, he bragged about how little he could spend on feeding his family. just $4.70 at Del Taco.
Side note, I just don't get that at all. Like, if there's one thing you should spend money on,
It's feeding your
food.
family.
One, you need it to live. Like,
2, it's good.
food is amazing.
I love food.
Food is my favorite thing.
So like his Taco Bell and hot dog diet really doesn't do it for you.
No, I just don't get it.
And like he thinks other people will be impressed by that.
Yeah.
Like he's like, oh man, this police investigator who's investigating me for the disappearance and possible
He's
murder
gonna
of my
really
wife,
admiring me.
totally gonna think it's
feeding my
cool
sons half a
that
hot
I can
dog for
feed my
dinner.
sons with one
Oh my
99-cent
God.
taco.
Ugh. I hate him.
I hate him so much. They revisited the details of what happened on Sunday, December 6th. Essentially, his Swiss cheese story remained the same as he told it the night before.
Yeah.
When investigators said, "Yeah, now why exactly did you go camping at midnight on a Sunday night with your boys?" He said, "Oh, I do that all the time," and he doubled down on his "I forgot what day of the week it was" defense. He also implied that Susan must have forgotten too because she let him go. Again, he was consistently vague and unhelpful, and nothing added up about his story. When they asked him where he thinks they should look for Susan, he said, "I don't know, maybe you should check beauty supply stores," and later added that Susan had been suicidal, a notion which was wholly unsupported by those who knew her.
Oh my God.
Yeah. When Josh was being interviewed, investigators were hard at work on his recently cleaned home. Of note, they found traces of Susan's blood on the floor in a light spray. Like she had sneezed up blood or coughed up blood or been hit in the particular way.
Yes. It's not like, oh, I accidentally cut myself.
Right. But
Better
also,
go get a Band-Aid.
it's not enough blood to arrest someone on. It's
No.
not body blood.
No.
So, that could have just been an accident.
Yeah.
From a legal defense standpoint. They also found a little small steel object that had been melted with extremely high heat on some drywall. A lot of people think that obviously this was the murder weapon. He 2 weeks earlier had purchased this blowtorch thing that he could use to melt steel. And
I didn't know about
you didn't know about this? Yeah, but they can't figure out what it is because it's just this charred,
melted
tiny chunk of steel.
Wow.
And they know it's some kind of object, but they can't tell what it is. And it was only like 5 or 6 ounces, not very big. That's a little suspicious, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would you melt? And they could tell it had been done within the last 24 hours or so. So they found the melted object. They also found the life insurance policies for $1.5 million, which is notably higher than most life insurance policies. And they also found a handwritten letter from Susan expressing fear for her life from Josh.
Yep.
So that's a pretty incriminating little pile of laundry that Josh forgot to do that morning. However, the most crucial piece of evidence, which of course would be Susan herself, without her, the West Valley police just didn't have enough to arrest Josh.
Yep.
So during this interview, they also interviewed Charlie, the oldest boy, who was almost 5 at the time, in a separate interview room. Charlie said that they had gone camping that night. However, unlike his father's story, who said that they went alone without Susan, he said that Susan had gone with them and that she had stayed where they were. He also said that they had flown to Dinosaur National Monument, which is like hundreds and hundreds of miles away, in a plane, and then changed his story and said that his mom had stayed behind, quote unquote, sleeping where the crystals are. That will come back into play later.
Yep.
Obviously, it's hard to get testimony from a 4-year-old.
And I read a thing once about his interview that said because he was so young, it's possible that he even just had multiple memories.
Yeah, he just mixed up all of his
because they did go out.
They went camping.
They were very outdoorsy people, so they did go camping a lot. So just the fact that the story was camping is not so weird in and of itself.
Exactly.
It's everything else surrounding it that's weird. But yeah, so it's very possible that they once had flown out to the dinosaurs on a plane, and that he just was mixing up days, and they were kind of running together. So.
And kids do that. A quick little aside about Charlie. A few weeks after the disappearance, a teacher had reported that Charlie had said that his mom was dead, which no one knew for sure technically, at this point. Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy, claimed that while at daycare several months after the disappearance, Braden, the younger of the two boys,
who was about 3 at this time, right?
drew a picture of a van with 3 people in it, and when they asked where mom was, he said, "Mom's in the trunk."
Yep.
Again, 3 years old, not good testimony.
Yeah, you don't just make that up.
But it's weird. Okay, anyway. So, the rest of the team that was involved with searching the house or interviewing Josh were getting search warrants for everything they possibly could get. Josh left the police station 10 minutes before a GPS tracking warrant had gone through so they could put it on his car. So, the instant Josh gets home, he takes a cab to the airport. When he's taking that cab, they're putting the GPS on his car, on his minivan. So he takes a cab to the airport and he gets a rental car. He knew that police were all over his house and were probably following him or tracking his vehicle, but he'd already kind of slipped through the trap because he was not being actively tracked in the rental car.
Yep.
So he was free to move about the highways of the Mountain West. Josh was, when he'd gone on the interview, he'd left his kids at Jennifer's house. And he didn't even pick them up that day.
Oh my God.
Just left them there.
Left them.
He mentioned at one point, and also we have news confirmation of this, that he went by he said he went by Jennifer's house at like 1 a.m. And he said that all the lights were off and he didn't want to disturb them, but Jennifer slept in a room at the front of the house and she was not sleeping and her light was on and she knew that was BS. So 18 hours later,
God,
there's this big 18-hour window with the rental car. Investigators call up Josh and they ask him, "Hey, where are you?" He was in Tree Mountain, Utah at the time, which is near the Idaho border, not anywhere close to the Salt Lake Valley.
No.
And he had just activated a new cell phone because the police had just taken his previous cell phone as part of the investigation. What Josh did and where he was during those 18 hours is still unknown to this day. During that time, he put 807 miles on the rental car.
Wow. In 18 hours.
In 18 hours.
Wow.
So, that gives you a sphere of about, a circle of about 400 miles to go to and come back.
Yes.
So that is, that's about 500,000 square miles to cover, potentially. Investigators eventually said, "Okay, well, Josh, if you don't come back right now, we're going to impound your van." And Josh, who's obviously more concerned about the broken window at his house and getting his van impounded,
and how much it's going to cost,
comes back. So the next day, on Thursday, it's still only been 2 days, the GPS beacon on his minivan goes off. He was headed west on I-80.
West on I-80.
Right past Will.
Yep.
He intentionally tried to lose any cars that he thought were following him. He kept pulling off and like doing weird maneuvers and getting back on. And it's actually funny because they were following him.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of cars behind him. But the funny thing was, Detective Ellis had a buddy in the DEA. And they borrowed a DEA plane to surveil him from the sky.
Right on. That's
so
awesome.
Every time he lost the cars behind him, the plane was just watching him go around in circles up above.
Wow.
So he keeps driving, and he goes across the Salt Flats, which is the western part of...
that's how you head to Wendover.
Yeah, and he went to Wendover. He parked, and he stayed in a Smith's parking lot for 20 minutes in Wendover, and then just headed back.
Weird.
Everyone thinks that he was trying to figure out the surveillance team behind him, and that's why he did this whole thing. He kept pulling off the freeway. One time he pulled off the freeway just inside on the Utah border and sat there near like a quarry for 2 hours. Just sat there.
Wow.
And then got back on the freeway and came back to Salt Lake County. Every single stop that he turned around in or visited, went over the quarry, random places along the way, the police did a very thorough search.
Interesting.
And found nothing. So, speaking of searches, The first search of the vast west desert of Utah took place on that Wednesday, the day actually before this little drive out to Wendover happened. Josh took his rental car on his quote-unquote totally normal road trip, and investigators took a helicopter to Simpson Springs to look for the Josh Powell campsite. When they were there, they actually ran across a local sheep herder who had confirmed that he'd seen Josh's minivan there that night. So that centralized the search for investigators, and they searched high and low. Amber Hardman, who is a work friend of Susan's, actually recalled a conversation with Josh that they had at the Christmas party a year before the Christmas that Susan had disappeared.
So 2008.
Yes. And they had been chatting about crime shows, particularly 24, which Susan was a big fan of.
Yes.
And Josh, who is known for being a vociferous and opinionated conversationalist, talked about how dumb those shows were. If you really wanted to hide a body, you could dump it in a mine in the West Desert and nobody would be able to find it. So, authorities, on Amber Hardman's tip, began looking in mines in the West Desert area of Utah about 9 days into the total search. Over a matter of weeks, searchers covered hundreds of mines, braving bats and bad air and possible collapses, and they found
there are a lot of mines out here.
There's a ton, because that's the only value out here, is that there's stuff in the ground. So, and they never found anything.
Nope.
Even much later in the investigation, Josh and the boys had moved to Washington at this point, and investigators had finally managed to crack open one of Josh's encrypted hard drives that he'd had at the house, and they found that he kept mentioning Topaz Mountain. So they did a large-scale search of Topaz Mountain. Charlie at one point had mentioned the crystals, and Topaz Mountain is a known geode site. So at one point, so they searched it, and it was actually the biggest search of the whole Susan Powell search process. At one point, cadaver dogs actually did signal on a pile of rocks that had been covering a burn site.
Interesting.
But when the burned wood was removed, the dogs stopped signaling. They figure it might have been someone who was burning bloody clothes or maybe another crime, but there was no evidence that there was any person ever there. So we had yet another fruitless search.
So sad.
That's actually going to wrap things up for us for part 1. Come back with us next week for part 2.
Or even in just a couple days.
Yeah, it might be a couple days.
Yeah.
We don't know. We're
season 1 finale.
Yeah,
first 2-parter.
It's a wild time. This is new ground for us.
We're stepping it up for you guys.
Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us for part 1, and until then, I'm Jack.
And I'm Valerie.
And this is Below the Salt.